Ladies and gentlemen, it is that beautiful time of year where everything is coming up for PC gamers. We've got so many launches coming out. Personally speaking, Alan Wake 2 is the game I've been waiting for. But of course, we've got Starfield, and we've got the most recent update to Cyberpunk that brings with it even better ray tracing and increased performance. So I thought that today it was only appropriate that we put together a pretty epic balls-to-the-wall gaming PC that can actually run all of the latest and greatest without any compromise whatsoever. A massive thank you to MSI for actually sponsoring this video. Let's get started. I think we'll begin by making ourselves some space, and then we'll turn to the enclosure or the chassis itself. And this is actually a new one, I haven't used it before, it's from MSI. This is the Gungir 300R Airflow, and as the name would suggest, this is of course an airflow orientated case. It does this by having a very large mesh panel on the front. You've got 3 ARGB fans on the front, you've got an additional ARGB fan on the back. Round the side, when I take this side panel off, they do come off nice and easily. You have this little ARGB hub here at the top as well, which essentially neatens everything up. It makes it easy to assemble. You don't have to have like daisy-chained fans that you've got to move and they don't always reach and they come undone and things when you're building your PC, which is a nightmare. So that's a good thing to see. If you do want to go for a vertical GPU mount, then you'd be very sort of pleased to know that inside the box, you get a PCIe Riser cable. Just a quick one here, by the way, from future PC Centric. I should make you aware that we did actually make a small mistake in the edit, as MSI very helpfully offered us all of the accessories and put them in the same box. So we didn't actually realize that if you do decide to recreate this exact rig, then you will need to go out and buy a PCIe Riser cable separately, as you only get that with the P or performance version of this case. If you go for that, you won't get the RGB hub, you won't get the RGB fans, but you will get all of the vertical GPU mounting stuff included in the box ready to go. Whereas if you go for this version, well, you do get the vertical mounting plate, you don't actually get the riser cables. So be aware of this and make sure you plan accordingly. In the interest of time, you can now see that I've removed the polystyrene that was for this GPU holder. I like the fact as well that obviously this is optional, you can use it, you don't have to, but then it also works in both the vertical and the standard GPU orientation. You just move the bracket around, which is pretty cool. But other than that, I think the main thing to note is that you've got plenty of height at the top. So if you do want to do radiators and push-pull, they should be able to fit without issue. And you can actually fit a 360 radiator at the top and the front at the same time, which is something you do need to be aware of, because a lot of cases will say they do support 360 at the top and the front, but it's not always at the same time. So if you're doing a custom loop, should be a good option. But let's pop this to one side and actually get our rig started. And the motherboard that we're using here is, of course, from MSI, is the B650 Carbon Wi-Fi. And this is a brilliant little option if you're trying to get maximum performance, but also save yourself a little bit of money in the process. This is very much going to be all about gaming performance. There is one change that you could maybe make that we discuss in just a second, but this motherboard looks absolutely fantastic. It's the business. I think it's going to perfectly match our all black theme with a little bit of RGB, but it does also support PCIe Generation 5 on this top SSD, and the cover of which is completely toolless. I mean, look, there you go. Just like that. But probably more importantly to most people, this does also support Wi-Fi, but something I love about these AMD boards is that even on the, I don't want to say entry level, because this is definitely not entry level, but even on the SKUs that aren't crazy high end and cost stupid amounts of money, you still get loads of USB ports, which is one of those very useful consumer centric features that you won't always find on some of the more entry level options. Assembly is as easy as ever. Just plop it down on top of your motherboard box, and then you can pick up the processor or the CPU. And of course we are going for AMD Ryzen today, and this is that component that I say you could consider swapping out for something different, because the one that we're using here is the Ryzen 7900. This is a 12-core CPU, and it has almost the same performance as the 7800 X3D, but not quite so much. And it's pretty much going to be a case of what you value more. Slightly more performance, especially in 1080p and 1440p titles, or 4 extra cores that are going to give you a little bit extra longevity. And if you do any form of productivity on the side, or maybe you do stuff whilst you're gaming, maybe you do some streaming, then this is actually going to be the better option, especially if you're playing at 4K resolution or something like that, where you're less likely to actually run into bottlenecking from your CPU in the first place. Then this could prove useful. And going forward, you might find that games do start to like to use more than 8 cores, or at least you've got an application that does use more than 8 cores, in which case this would probably be a sensible bet. And of course, because this is an AM5 motherboard, in theory you can actually upgrade this for years to come, as AMD should be releasing CPUs in the next generation, and hopefully the generation after that, that should just be plug in with a BIOS update. But of course AMD's future plans are kept locked up in some secret safe probably held by Lisa Sue. Sue! I'm not usually in touch with football jokes, but there you go. RAM-wise, you are of course going to need some DDR5. This used to be a little bit of a barrier to entry because the kits were very, very expensive, but these days they they've come down in price quite a lot, and the speeds have been increasing pretty rapidly as well, so there's now quite a dramatic difference between DDR4 and DDR5, but it doesn't really matter on AMD because you don't get the choice. If you're going for Intel, you can actually sort of swap out the motherboard. Some are DDR4, some are DDR5, so if you're upgrading, that is a valid option, but here you will need to grab your DDR5 memory and drop it into place. This is some Trident Z5 from G-Skill, and this is running at 6,000 megahertz, which is nice. Satisfying noise incoming. Whilst this motherboard does support PCIe Generation 5, at the time of filming, I'm still not exactly convinced that it is worth going for a Gen 5 SSD. This is something we'll be testing in the coming weeks as I've finally got one in, so get subscribed if you're not already to see the different performance tests and load speeds and things like that. But for now, we're going for a very quick Gen 4 drive. This is the KC3000. And you can find these on sales very regularly for extremely good prices. But as I say in every single video, don't necessarily buy this exact SSD, buy the best one that you can that's on sale. But as you can see, the tallest SSD is very easy to install. You just line up the heatsink and you give it a push until it clicks. I think I'd argue that that's the most technical bit of our rig out of the way. Now it's just a case of actually getting this inside our chassis. So we'll lay this down on top of the desk. We'll make sure all of our standoffs are pre-applied, which they helpfully are in this chassis. Then we can just pick up our motherboard and lay this gently down over the holes. You've got a middle one here that sort of catches the motherboard. Then you will need to grab your motherboard screws, then just fix this down. Once you've done that, you can then stand everything back up again and start to admire your work. You can see what I mean about the all black theme here. I think this is going to look really nice, especially with the sort of RGB fans and our GPU holder. You then need to grab all of your case connections. These will be things like the power switch, so it actually plugs into your motherboard and does something. You've then got USB Type-C for the front, a USB 3. You've got HD analog audio, and then you've also got an addressable RGB header that can plug into your motherboard, so you can synchronize your case and fan lighting with your motherboard. I think we're going to go for a vertical GPU orientation though. So I'm going to remove the back panel. I believe the new one should push in as easily as the old one. Yeah, there you go. And then it should just be a case of grabbing our PCIe Riser cable, connect it at the top, use the screws right at the back if you can, just to get this nice and tight. I have a feeling that I probably should have done this after plugging in the front I/O, because it's now slightly harder to access these things, but we'll give it a go. USB Type-C is up here below the ATX. The USB 3 goes just below it here by these SATA ports if you're using an old-fashioned 2.5-inch SSD. Absolutely love the fact that the front panel comes as one big unit, so you can just plug this in like so. Fortunately, the HD audio is just tucked out the way at the bottom left of the board. But I think that is just about it, because our addressable RGB is located at the top here, so we can feed this round and then get it connected. Easy as that. The next thing on our build list is this. It is the Be Quiet power supply, the Pure Power 12M, and this is actually a new one. And the main difference really, other than being efficient, having 850 watts of power, is the fact that it does support PCIe Generation 5 cables up to 600 watts, which is going to be perfect for our 4080s. It means we have one cable that goes to it rather than having to fiddle about with loads of stuff on the back, or use horrible adapters that just will look pretty crap. Make sure the fan is facing downwards, then just grab your care package and then just gently lay this into place. Don't forget to screw this in. Then you need to grab the cables and feed them through to the other side. Grab our CPU and plug this into the 8-pin at the top left. Then grab the massive one. You really can't miss this because it's ginormous. Line it up and then give it a good push home. And with that, we are actually pretty much done. It just leaves us with one final component that hopefully won't be upside down once it's fitted, our all-in-one liquid cooler, because of course aftermarket CPU coolers do give you better performance. A lot of CPUs these days won't actually come with a cooler, so you will have to buy one anyway. But even if you don't, strictly speaking, need one, I would still always recommend an aftermarket CPU cooler because it makes your whole rig look better, but more importantly to me, make the whole thing quieter too. This one is part of MSI's Core Liquid E range. You can get this in a 240 or a 360, and I think it's going to look fantastic inside our rig. Let's do ourselves a quick little test fit, but I think it is going to be a lot easier to take this GPU holder out for now. But as I say, you can actually fit a 360 at the top and at the front at the same time, or at least so MSI say. Place the RGB fans on top, blowing through the radiator. Screw them into place. This is the bit where I say radiators annoy me, because you've got all of these cables now that you have to kind of stow through the top. And use my hands, screw it into place. Once that's on the top, you need to grab your AMD bracket and then attach this to the pump head. I'm then going to lay the case down flat for this next bit to make it slightly easier, but I want to grab the thermal paste that comes in the box, give it a slight dab in the middle, and then a tiny bit either side. Then it's just a case of grabbing your pump head, laying this over the bracket, and then just screwing it down with those thumb screws. This is actually one of the easier coolers I've used, because quite often when you have this AM5 bracket, you can sort of be toing and froing between it being on and off. So fair play to MSI, they've got this one right. And let's make absolutely no bones about it. This is not an inexpensive product. If you want the best bang for your buck, maximum price performance, you are going to want to look at something else. But if you are going for the very best visuals, you want your ray tracing, you want to enable path tracing in Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty, then you are realistically looking at something very high end and from Team Green if you do want to get the best performance. But as we've said before many times on the channel, don't discount AMD, because if you do want to go for performance and you're not quite so fussed about ray tracing, then AMD does seem to have some fantastic options, and by comparison, some of the Nvidia cards can start to look a little bit more expensive. But as I say, if you do want ray tracing, then something like the 4080 is going to have you covered. But let's see if I have actually managed to install this vertical GPU mount properly, shall we? Moment of truth time then. I can't actually see what I'm doing. Oh, okay, yes, that has answered my question. No, I have not fitted this properly. I think you need to use the spacers. Right, spacers in, let's try this again. Once again, planning my angle of attack, and we're in. Yes, there we go. That is our vertical GPU mount with our GPU. Make sure you screw this nice and safe and secure. Find our power cable, and then route this through, plugging it in to our graphics card. And then I think you should have your completed rig. And I really like the look of this one. It's definitely a bit different to what we normally do. Obviously, it's mainly down to that vertical GPU, but I think it does look rather nice. And just like MSI said, there is a very large gap here. So when you put the glass on, it can still breathe a lot better than if it was closer to the glass. But I'm excited to see how well it performs, excited to test thermals, but of course, first things first, we need to see if this works. So let's grab ourselves a 4K monitor, grab ourselves a PC-centric mouse mat. You can get yours today with a link down below. We'll plug in a mouse and a keyboard, and then we'll see if this thing works. Looking promising. And look at that, there you go. All of the RGB comes to life, including the stuff that you've got at the top. Oh no, actually that's not plugged in, that's just a reflection. Okay, I need to fix that, and I will fix that. And please don't be too alarmed if when you turn your AMD system on for the first time, there is this little bit of a delay. It's not something I like, but it does this memory training to essentially try and get everything to work properly. But it does mean that you can be waiting for up to a minute before something actually happens on screen. So don't panic. There's still time. This could be great timing as well, because it's just said HDMI 1 and it says new CPU installed. That essentially means that our system should be working properly. We still need to check things, make sure the SSD is detected, the RAM, we need to enable XMP or AMD Expo, we need to tune the fans, we need to make sure resize bar support is on, and of course we need to install Windows. But you've done the hard bit now. Congratulations. So just leave this with me for a second to install Windows, get all the games downloaded, and then we'll test performance. And through the power of editing and a wardrobe change, we are back. And I have to say, on reflection, I really am very happy with how the rig looks. I mean, personally speaking, I like something that has the more traditional, timeless design, and this really does fit in there very nicely. I mean, I like the fact that you can choose between the vertical GPU mount and of course the horizontal. I think that's going to be one of the main features of this. But of course, in order to be able to properly test this, we are going to have to put the side panel back on. And I have also tuned the fans a little bit, so when we do some acoustic testing, do bear in mind that if you don't do it, the system will obviously be loud straight out of the box. But let us begin our testing with the big one. This is some Cyberpunk 2077, and this is running at 4K with DLSS. No frame generation at the moment, but this is running without ray tracing, but everything else is set to Ultra. And even without RTX, you've got to admit, this is a pretty fantastic looking game. I'm not entirely sure how much of this has changed in the latest update, but you have to admit this is an absolutely fantastic looking game. It really, really is. I'm excited to play the DLC myself as well, actually. It's been quite a while since I actually sat down with this, like properly, rather than just doing these sort of tests. But let's go into the options menu and actually have a look at what we can change around. So here we have our DLSS set to automatic. This is running at 4K, so it is very intense. We will now go down and turn our ray tracing on. We will max this out to Psycho, and we should then see our frame rate will of course drop, but because this is an RTX 4080, you should, and indeed you can, see that you're still able to get a very high frame rate. I mean, around about 68 frames a second without the use of DLSS 3 is very, very cool. And actually the latency as well, I've got to admit, is very impressive. I mean, take this with a slight pinch of salt, because we're also recording with shadow play, which is how you can actually see this footage. So real world will be slightly lower than this. However, this being a 40 series GPU, of course we do have one extra technology that we can actually turn on, which is this one, which is called DLSS frame generation. And if you've been living under a rock and you're not entirely sure how this works, it is actually very simple. Essentially, it almost interjects a frame between rendered frames. So it's using artificial intelligence to actually give you a smoother looking image, which in turn actually increases the frame rate. Now we should be absolutely clear to say that this will affect the latency of the game. In fact, you can now see that that's around about 50 milliseconds. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, as long as a single player game is under about 55, 60 milliseconds, then I don't think you're going to really notice a huge difference, because it's still going to be very playable. I mean, if you're going to want to play like a multiplayer title, realistically you're looking for latency like 20, 25 milliseconds, because it's all about reaction times. But obviously this is a game where that's just not the case, but you can clearly see that the frame rate has increased massively. Now we're looking at around about 100 frames a second or so, but obviously we've got all of that lovely ray tracing enabled, so we're actually getting a higher frame rate than we had before without any ray tracing with the technology of DLSS 3 and RTX enabled. Now a lot of people will say that that's not a real frame rate, and that is obviously true, but then at the same time, I've not really noticed any artifacts myself. It's purely just the latency really that I would say you can notice a difference of. But again, when it's under 55 milliseconds, it's not a problem. And this is how I would genuinely choose to play the game. But we do have one extra setting that we can actually go in and enable, and that is the path tracing technology preview. So what this will do is, rather than using ray tracing for certain aspects like the lighting and the shadows, reflections, it essentially does some full path tracing. So all of the rays are actually properly mapped, and this is going to be as realistic as you can get. And you can see an absolutely massive difference when it comes to the image quality, you really can. But what I will say is that the latency has now increased. You can see we're currently at about 65 milliseconds. So again, this is recording, so I mean we can stop the recording to see how much difference that makes. It's gone down by about 5 milliseconds or so. We're currently looking about 57. So in the real world, you probably could actually use this to properly play the game. But we'll start the recording again just so you can actually see all of these lovely reflections and things. But I definitely can notice that I don't know, it's a bit weird. It's almost as if the game lighting has got a lot better, but then you can see that the frame rate has dropped, and where you're getting this interjected frames between the rendered frames, it is starting to look, I'd say almost a little bit peculiar. I mean, let's see what happens if we go and turn on the latest setting, which is this DLSS ray reconstruction. This will make the game look better and can also increase the frame rate as well. I mean, this is a really good opportunity actually to see the difference with this ray reconstruction. I mean, just look at the lighting down there. That is insane. I'd say that the sweet spot for playing the game for me personally probably was with that DLSS 3 and RTX set to Psychos and not the path tracing. And I think this absolutely goes to show that even if you're not all about ray tracing now, it is absolutely the future of video games. Oh, and just a quick one, by the way, I realized we hadn't actually tested 1440p. These are those exact same settings, so max, path tracing, DLSS 3, DLSS set to balance, but now we're playing at 1440p. So if you are running at a lower resolution, then clearly you're able to get all of these effects. And interestingly, we're not getting that same sort of motion blur, weird effect that we were seeing when we were running at 4K. And I would say this is just because we have a higher frame rate to start with, so DLSS 3 is able to work faster and, in my opinion, a whole lot better. But you can notice that there is a bit more softness to the image, whereas when we were running at 4K with DLSS at performance, the overall image did look better. But let's move on to our next title, shall we? One that's actually quite difficult to show because there are, of course, so many different areas in the game. And today we're looking at space because this is, of course, Starfield. This is about half an hour into the game. I promise I am going to sit down with it properly and get to some better areas, I assure you. But for now, this is what we have. And what you can see here is the game running at max settings 4K with FSR 2, with the resolution set to 75%, and we're currently getting anywhere really between 60 and 99 frames a second. I will say that the game doesn't feel quite as nice as it has done on some of the AMD graphics cards, almost surprise, surprise, as we are getting quite a lot of fluctuation. It seems to be going 57, then 100, 57, then 100, which is a little bit annoying. But obviously it is going to depend on whereabouts you are in the game world and what you're looking at. I mean, let's go back to the first planet for a second so you can get a better idea of some of the range anyway. And I do understand that obviously, because this is still very early in the game, there are going to be areas that will be more intense. But to be fair, this, I would argue, is one of them. You can see the frame rate has dropped down now quite dramatically, actually. That is surprising. We're getting anywhere between like 30 and 50 frames a second. I don't know why it's fluctuating quite so much. I know there are going to be some updates that will make this game run better on NVIDIA GPUs, but I must admit I'm quite confused why we are getting this sort of range. I mean, what happens if we turn the resolution down? Is it some weird bug at the moment? Render resolution, let's set this to the equivalent of DLSS performance, which is 50%, and then let's see what happens to the frame rate. I mean, you can definitely see that the visuals are not as good, but then the frame rate has increased quite a lot, but you can still see that it's dipping. So I don't know, man. I think there is just something at the moment that is affecting Starfield. I can't put my finger on it, but I think it's very fair to say even at ultra settings, a 4080 should be performing better in this title. So watch this space and we will obviously keep you updated as we test more and more gaming PCs with NVIDIA cards with Starfield. But that's everything you need to know about our single player titles. But what about something more multiplayer? Well, let's jump into some Apex Legends and have a look. This is running just under max settings at 4K, and as we jump out of the plane, you can see we're currently getting about 160, 170 FPS, but I'd wager as soon as we touch down and get into a little bit more of a quieter area, that's going to go up to 200 frames a second, which is pretty insane, actually. I mean, again, this is a very expensive GPU, make no mistake about it, but so far it's been running very, very well, other than Starfield, but as we say, that's a weird anomaly. But it can run the cutting-edge Cyberpunk with ray tracing, but then for what most people are probably actually going to be using their gaming PC for, at least more regularly, some multiplayer action, you can see this is a very capable GPU, because again, I say it every single video at the moment, there's not really many people that are going to actually be playing games at 4K when it comes to multiplayer. You'd probably just want to turn this down to 1440p, but this proves that you really don't actually need to do that. If you do have a high resolution 4K monitor, and loads of them are coming out now that have high refresh rates, I mean, you can even buy a 4K 240Hz monitor in the coming months, then clearly something like the 4080, if you play Apex, is going to be a very good option. I'm not sure whether you necessarily should, because it seems very overkill, but it is fantastic, as I say, to actually have that option. I mean, what happens if we turn this down to 1440p? Because let's be honest, most people are going to want to do this, myself included. And you can see that we're now actually hitting that frame rate cap. So there you go, 1440p, 300 Hz monitors. That's what you should be looking for, because we're currently getting, well, as I say, we're hitting the frame rate cap most of the time, around about 300 FPS. It certainly does dip down. I mean, you can see in the more open areas, we're currently getting a mere 260, right? But clearly, if you are someone that plays something like Apex Legends very regularly and you do want to have the best possible gaming PC experience, you want to have as low latency, you want to let your ability, I don't know, go unhindered, shall we say, by low PC performance, clearly something like this is a fantastic option. Oh, actually, you know what? We haven't shown you thermals and acoustics yet. Here's your noise test. So basically nothing whatsoever, other than the big RGB lights that clearly tell you this PC is on. I don't think a lot of people would actually notice, especially if this was under a desk. Very, very quiet. And in terms of our thermals, we're getting about 76, 77 on the CPU, and then about 63 on the graphics card. Otherwise, I have to say I've been very impressed with this build. It was easy to build in, very flexible, good airflow. It's probably more going to come down to the design, really, if you like this design or whether, I don't know, you want to go for something else. And with that, I think that is everything you need to know about our rig. What do you like about it? What do you dislike? What would you change? Let us know down in the comment section below. Please smash the like button if you've enjoyed it. It really does help out. Get yourself subscribed so you don't miss more builds, including our more budget-friendly builds. I'll leave a link to the $1,000 PC build that we've done recently on the channel if you want to check that out. And of course, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything featured in this video, then as always, you can find it linked down below with my Amazon affiliate links. But thank you so much for watching this video. We'll catch you in the next one.